So in my mind, the one thing that links Trump, Diaper Don, Don Corleone, and Sean Combs, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, men with different names, men with a lot of stuff around them, and the truth isn't something which is always clearly visible. The version of the story they want to put over is often very different from the actual facts, and that's in both cases. Whether they're innocent or guilty, they both have that in common in terms of the facade may not be the correct truth. We'll start with Liz Cheney in terms of just what she's had to say about former guy. And then please stay with us. There's a clip from Nickelodeon with P. Diddy, which is just shocking. I mean, shocking.
And, you know, there was a moment right after January 6th where I was having dinner with my husband and our two youngest kids, who happened to be our sons. And I looked at my sons across the dinner table, and I had this realization, you know, I grew up in a country where I didn't have to wonder if we were going to have a peaceful transfer of power in the United States. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, my God, maybe they won't be able to say the same thing. And that is why it's so fundamentally important that we ensure, Democrats, independents, Republicans, that we work together, we vote together, we make clear that Donald Trump is not an acceptable alternative. He is not the lesser of two evils. He is a completely unfit man for office. He's already shown us what he would do, and he can never be near the Oval Office again.
It sounds.
Think about those 187 minutes while the Capitol was being attacked, and Donald Trump sat in the dining room next to the Oval Office, and he watched the attack happen. He watched it play out on television, and his advisors were coming in and telling him, you have to tell the mob to stop. And he wouldn't tell them to stop. And his daughter was telling him that. And then at one point, we know from testimony in the Select Committee that he was handed a note. And the note said a civilian had been shot at the chamber, at the door to the chamber of the House of Representatives. And still, you know, he put the note down on the table in front of him and would not tell the mob to stop. And so, you know, there was enough that we knew at the time of the impeachment vote in terms of his lack of action, his mobilization of the mob, his incitement of the mob, that it was clear he had to be impeached. Of course, the Select Committee work led to a much greater understanding of the evidence and the depth and the extent of the plan. But he should have been convicted. If the Senate had moved and had held the trial immediately, he would have been convicted, and we wouldn't be dealing with the challenge that we're facing.
No, I mean, look, I'm certainly not ruling that out.
Which means what?
Which means that I'm not ruling out at some point being a candidate for office.
Walk me through that. All right, we will have a sign-up sheet for those who want to be the chair of the CHENEY Louisiana campaign.
I feel that it's very important to actually go back and look at what she did. Because what she did was, first of all, enabled and spread herself the big lie. And the big lie is this big lie that the election was rigged, that the election was stolen, that there was fraud, that you know, that somehow Donald Trump actually won the election. That big lie is toxic in our democratic system. And and her role in spreading that is important to remember. She also, though, we know from public testimony in front of the Select Committee, she was directly involved in Donald Trump's effort to generate fake electors. His illegal effort to ensure that in states that Biden won, that electors for Donald Trump would meet and would submit their electoral slates, which were fraudulent, which in some cases the electors claimed were duly certified slates of electors, to submit those to the Congress, to the archives, so that Mike Pence would reject the real electors. And Ronna McDaniel facilitated at least one phone call that she was on, along with Donald Trump and John Eastman. Now, John Eastman, just an hour or so ago, the disciplinary body of the California State Bar, after a very extensive set of hearings, recommended that John Eastman be disbarred. And part of that is connected to his role in the fake elector plot. We also know, because this is on, I believe there's an audio recording of Ronna McDaniel on the phone with Donald Trump, pressuring election officials in Michigan not to certify the actual legitimate results of the election in Michigan. And she said to them, if you go home tonight, don't sign on to this and we'll get you lawyers. Ronna McDaniel also called the events of January 6th. She said that the January 6th Select Committee was involved in, quote, the persecution of individuals who were engaged in legitimate political discourse. So, you know, those having played a role in a very serious effort to overturn an election, having played a role in facilitating Donald Trump's efforts to seize power, those are the things that I think that people need to remember and recognize about the former chairwoman of the RNC. I believe that we're in a situation where the future of the democracy depends upon making sure the Republicans are not in the majority in the House and in the Senate in 2025. And I say that as somebody who has significant disagreements with policies of many of my Democratic colleagues. But I think that we can survive bad policy. We can't survive leaders who are going to torch the Constitution.
Other than teach history,
Donald Trump had planned. Now, somebody needs to ask Jim Jordan, why didn't you report to the Capitol Police what you knew Donald Trump had planned? You were in those meetings at the White House. And if the Republicans decide that Jim Jordan should be the Speaker of the House, there will, and by the way, I don't think that's going to happen. I think he'll lose. But if they were to decide that, there would no longer be any possible way to argue that a group of elected Republicans could be counted on to defend the Constitution.
Two clowns for the price of one. I think it's circus time. Finally, James Comer is about to realise he's wasted millions of money and to stop the nonsense inquiry into the Biden family. And then I'm not really sure what Mark Robinson's role in life is. But seriously, Mark, let me just address you directly. You talk absolute nonsense, okay? They're laughing at you behind your back. You're angry about everything. And you're not really going to go down in history as making a contribution to anything apart from toilet roll. That's about it. It's just caca you are talking. Mark, seriously, Mark, this is not for you. You're like a new version of Ronna McDaniel. And by the way, anybody who thinks that if they turn the TV on and they see RuPaul, the devil's there, Satan is there. Mark, do yourself a favor. Do yourself a favour. Therapy, if you can find one. Because I even think that therapy just may not be good enough for you. You got an issue, yeah, Sorry, Mark. Maybe look in the mirror. There's the one. Start with the mirror, Mark. Maybe that will help you get to a brighter tomorrow. Can you imagine waking up and being Mark Robinson? Blech. You see, it's time for folks in this country to start realizing, like this man said, to realize who we are. And who are we? Who are Americans? You see, the folks on the left want to tell you the Americans were the folks who chained folks up and whipped them and beat them and made them do work that they didn't pay for. They want to tell you that Americans are the folks that wore white hoods and hung people from trees and burned people alive and raped and pillaged. That's who they want to tell you Americans are. They want to tell you Americans are the people who kneel on innocent people's necks and murder them in broad daylight. That's who they want to tell you Americans are. Well, let me tell you who Americans are. Americans are people who grow up in poor neighborhoods with little next to nothing, who don't even really think of themselves as part of the larger society, but yet you still hold on to the American dream.
Well, what's so crazy about this is there's this counter effort being made to try to sell the American public on the idea that you guys haven't found anything. And I think we're dealing here with actual living, breathing business partners testifying on the contrary to quite an extent. So what do you liken this to? Is this Garland just trying to be a human shield for the president? Like, what is this?
Well, Garland's working with the deep state, who's working with the liberal mainstream media to try to indoctrinate into people's minds that there's no evidence.
So the P. Diddy Diddler story is how it's being politicized by Fox is kind of interesting, because they've now decided that P. Diddy is the biggest black entertainer who's ever supported the Democrat Party. That isn't totally true, but as far as Fox are concerned, that's where they're going with. I'm more interested, by the way, in what... well, this isn't good. I'll let you see it for yourself. This is not good.
But it seems part of his whole life, his whole journey has been this sort of scorched earth campaign where you see him continuing to succeed or do big things and leave people in his wake hurt. We go back to CCNY, which a party that he overpromoted, that people ended up getting killed. You think about the many artists who either left, in complaint, or went to the church, or, died after, I mean, there was a lot of disheartened artists who left him that he raised up. On and on. And now this large growing number of people who are alleging crazy stuff about him. Yeah. And these are things that people in the industry have been hearing about.
It's giving R. Kelly, Teray. It's disturbing.
I was personally disturbed many years ago. Okay. I know this man well enough to call him and say, hey, I need a favor. Yeah. And this might have been 10, 12 years ago that I called him and say, hey, I have a family member who I want you to hire them as an intern. Yeah. And I have never talked about this publicly. And he said yes. And they were flying around, one of the interns, Atlanta, Miami, whatever, on the jet, in the house, whatever. And then the internship stopped abruptly, like 3 or 4 months into it. Yeah. And I spoke to my family member, like, well, what happened? And they wouldn't say. Yeah. And I'm like, why did it end? He wouldn't say. And years later, they finally came out, and this a male, and said that Puff had said, come home, stay the night with me, or the internship is over. And they said, absolutely not. He said, absolutely not. And the internship ended. But from there, I was like, this is how it goes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So to hear that things went even further with potentially, allegedly, many other people. Yeah. It's not, we feel like we've seen this coming.
Oh, yeah. We all have stories. Seriously, we all have stories. Mine is horrific, and only 5 people know it. And I probably will never tell it. But since then, I've been like, Yep. And I also am very intimately aware that you tell your truth and you become victimized over and over and over and over and over and over. And mind you, I then interviewed him many times. I have a lot of stories, y'all. I've been in Hollywood for 25 years, maybe longer, 30. I got a lot of stories. Unfortunately, maybe I'll write a book one day, but it just is so traumatizing that women just want to live every day and feel safe. And when we revisit and revisit, we live in a state of victimhood, and nobody wants to live there. So for those of you who are like, why didn't you say something then? Because we just want to live. We want to be happy, and we really want to forget the trauma. So there's that.
And he's still sound asleep. What are we going to do? I don't know. You know, in situations like this, I always ask myself, what would P. Diddy do? What would P. Diddy do? No, I don't know. Hey, let's ask him. Oh, okay. P. Diddy?
What's up?
We can't wake up Shane.
You try symbols?
Yep.
What about sour milk?
Didn't work.
Tell you what. Take this toy helicopter. Put it down his pants.